Tahirih. A woman chaste and holy, a sign and token of surpassing beauty, a burning brand of the love of God, a lamp of his bestowal was Jináb-i-Ṭáhirih. She was called Umm-Salmá. She was the daughter of Ḥájí Mullá Ṣáliḥ, a mujtahid of Qazvín, and her paternal uncle was Mullá Taqí, the Imám-Jum or leader of prayers in the cathedral mosque of that city. They married her to Mullá Muḥammad, the son of Mullá Taqí, and she gave birth to 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. All 3 were bereft of the grace that encompassed their mother, and all failed to recognize the truth of the cause. When she was still a child, her father selected a teacher for her, and she studied various branches of knowledge and the arts, achieving remarkable ability in literary pursuits. Such was the degree of her scholarship and attainments that her father would often express his regret, saying, "Would that she had been a boy, for he would have shed illumination upon my household and would have succeeded me." One day she was a guest in the home of Mullá Jawad, a cousin on her mother's side, and there in her cousin's library she came upon some of the writings of Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i. Delighted with what he had to say, Tahirih asked to borrow the writings and take them home. Mullá Jawad violently objected, telling her, "Your father is an enemy of the twin luminous lights, Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. If he should even dream that any words of those 2 great beings, any fragrance from the garden of those realities had come your way, he would make an attempt against my life, and you too would become the target of his wrath." Tahirih answered, "For a long time now I have thirsted after this. I have yearned for these explanations, these inner truths. Give me whatever you have of these books. Never mind if it angers my father." Accordingly, Mullá Jawad sent over the writings of the Sheikh and the Sayyid. One night, Tahirih sought out her father in his library and began to speak of Sheikh Ahmad's teachings. The very moment he learned that his daughter knew of the Shaykhi doctrines, Mullá Ṣálih's denunciations rang out, and he cried, "Jawad has made you a lost soul." Tahirih answered, "The late Shaykh was a true scholar of God, and I have learned an infinity of spiritual truths from reading his books. Furthermore, he bases whatever he says on the traditions of the holy Imams. You call yourself a mystic knower and a man of God. You consider your respected uncle to be a scholar as well, and most pious. Yet in neither of you do I find a trace of those qualities." For some time she carried on heated discussions with her father, debating such questions as the resurrection and the day of judgment, the ninth ascent of Muhammad to heaven, the promise and the threat, and the advent of the promised one. Lacking arguments, her father would resort to curses and abuse. Then one night, in support of her contention, Tahirih quoted a holy tradition from the Imám Ja'far as-Sadiq, and since it confirmed what she was saying, her father burst out laughing, mocking the tradition. Tahirih said, "O my father, these are the words of the holy Imam. How can you mock and deny them?" From that time on, she ceased to debate and contend with her father. Meanwhile, she entered into secret correspondence with Sayyid Kazim regarding the solution of complex theological problems. And thus it came about that the Sayyid conferred on her the name Solace of the Eyes, Qurratul Ain. As for the title Tahirih, the Pure One, it was first associated with her in Badasht and was subsequently approved by the Bab and recorded in tablets. Tahirih had caught fire. She set out for Karbala, hoping to meet Sayyid Kazim, but she arrived too late. 10 days before she reached that city, he passed away. Not long before his death, the Sayyid had shared with his disciples the good news that the promised advent was at hand. Go forth, he repeatedly told them, and seek out your Lord. Thus the most distinguished of his followers gathered for retirement and prayer, for fasts and vigils in the Masjid Kufa, while some awaited the advent in Karbala. Among these was Tahirih, fasting by day, practicing religious disciplines, and spending the night in vigils and chanting prayers. One night, when it was getting along toward dawn, she laid her head on her pillow, lost all awareness of this earthly life, and dreamed a dream. In her vision, a youth, a Sayyid, wearing a black cloak and a green turban, appeared to her in the heavens. He was standing in the air, reciting verses and praying with his hands upraised. At once she memorized one of those verses and wrote it down in her notebook when she awoke. After the Bab had declared his mission and his first book, The Best of Stories, was circulated, Tahirih was reading a section of the text one day, and she came upon that same verse which she had noted down from the dream. Instantly offering thanks, she fell to her knees and bowed her forehead to the ground, convinced that the Bab's message was truth. This good news reached her in Karbala, and she at once began to teach. She translated and expounded the best of stories, also writing in Persian and Arabic, composing odes and lyrics, and humbly practicing her devotions, performing even those that were optional and supernumerary. When the evil ulamas in Karbala got wind of all this, and learned that a woman was summoning the people to a new religion and had already influenced a considerable number, they went to the governor and lodged a complaint. Their charges, to be brief, led to violent attacks on Tahirih and sufferings which she accepted and for which she offered praise and thanks. When the authorities came hunting for her, they first assaulted Shams-ud-Dua, mistaking her for Tahirih. As soon, however, as they heard that Tahirih had been arrested, they let Shams go. For Tahirih had sent a message to the governor saying, "I am at your disposal. Do not harm any other." The governor set guards over her house and shut her away, writing Baghdad for instructions as to how he should proceed. For 3 months she lived in a state of siege, completely isolated, with the guards surrounding her house. Since the local authorities had still received no reply from Baghdad, Tahirih referred her case to the governor, saying, "No word has come from either Baghdad or Constantinople. Accordingly, we will ourselves proceed to Baghdad and await the answer there." The governor gave her leave to go, and she set out, accompanied by Shams-ud-Du'a and the Leaf of Paradise, the sister of Mullá Hussein, and her mother. In Baghdad, she stayed first in the house of Sheikh Muhammad, the distinguished father of Agha Muhammad Mustafa, but so great was the press of people around her that she transferred her residence to another quarter, engaged night and day in spreading the faith, and freely associated with the inhabitants of Baghdad. She thus became celebrated throughout the city, and there was a great uproar. Tahirih also maintained a correspondence with the ulamas of Qazvín. She presented them with unanswerable proofs, and when one or another appeared before her, she offered him convincing arguments. Finally, she sent a message to the Shia divines, saying to them, "If you're not satisfied with these conclusive proofs, I challenge you to a trial by ordeal." Then there was a great outcry from the divines, and the governor was obliged to send Tahirih and her woman companions to the house of Ibn al-Lusi, who was Mufti of Baghdad. Here she remained about 3 months, waiting for word and directions from Constantinople. Ibn al-Lusi would engage her in learned dialogues. Questions would be asked and answers given, and he would not deny what she had to say. On a certain day, the Mufti related one of his dreams and asked her to tell him what it meant. He said, "In my dream, I saw the Shia ulamas arriving at the holy tomb of Imam Hussein, the Prince of Martyrs. They took away the barrier that encloses the tomb, and they broke open the resplendent grave, so that the immaculate body lay revealed to their gaze. They sought to take up the holy form, but I cast myself down on the corpse, and I warded them off." Tahirih answered, "This is the meaning of your dream. You're about to deliver me from the hands of the Shia divines." "I too had interpreted it thus," said Ibn al-Lusi, since he had discovered that she was well versed in learned questions and in sacred commentaries and texts. The two often carried on debates. She would speak on such themes as the day of resurrection, the balance, and the sirat, and he would not turn away. Then came a night when the father of Ibn al-Lusi called at the house of his son. He had a meeting with Tahirih and abruptly, without asking a single question, began to curse, mock, and revile her. Embarrassed at his father's behavior, Ibn al-Lusi apologized. Then he said, "The answer has come from Constantinople. The king has commanded that you be set free, but only on condition that you leave his realms. Go then tomorrow, make your preparations for the journey, and hasten away from this land." Accordingly, Tahirih with her woman companions left the Mufti's house, saw to arranging for their travel gear, and went out of Baghdad. When they left the city, a number of Arab believers carrying arms walked along beside their convoy. Among the escort were Sheikh Sultan, Sheikh Muhammad, and his distinguished son, Muhammad Mustafa and Sheikh Saleh. And these were mounted. It was Sheikh Muhammad who defrayed the expenses of the journey. When they reached Kermanshah, the women alighted at one house, the men at another, and the inhabitants arrived in a continuous stream to seek information as to the new fate. Here, as elsewhere, the ulamas were soon in a state of frenzy, and they commanded that the newcomers be expelled. As a result, the Khuda, or chief officer of that quarter, with a band of people, laid siege to the house where Tahirih was and sacked it. Then they placed Tahirih and her companions in an uncovered Khuda and carried them from the town to an open field where they put the captives out. The drivers then took their animals and returned to the city. The victims were left on the bare ground with no food, no shelter, and no means of traveling on. Tahirih at once wrote a letter to the prince of that territory, in which she told him, "O thou just governor, we were guests in your city. Is this the way you treat your guests?" When her letter was brought to the governor of Kermanshah, he said, "I knew nothing of this injustice. This mischief was kindled by the divines." He immediately commanded the Khuda to return all the travelers' belongings. That official duly surrendered the stolen goods. The drivers with their animals came back out of the city. The travelers took their places and resumed the journey. They arrived in Hamadan, and here their stay was a happy one. The most illustrious ladies of that city, even the princesses, would come to visit, seeking the benefits of Tahirih's teaching. In Hamadan, she dismissed a part of her escort and sent it back to Baghdad, while she brought some of them, including Shamsuddin and Sheikh Saleh, along with her to Qazvín. As they traveled, some riders advanced to meet them, kinsmen of Tahirih from Qazvín, and they wished to lead her away alone, unescorted by the others, to her father's house. Tahirih refused, saying, "These are in my company." In this way, they entered Qazvín. Tahirih proceeded to her father's house, while the Arabs who had formed her escort alighted at the caravanserai. Tahirih soon left her father and went to live with her brother, and there the great ladies of the city would come to visit her. All this until the murder of Mullá Taqí, when every Babi in Qazvín was taken prisoner. Some were sent to Tehran and then returned to Qazvín and martyred. Mullá Taqí's murder came about in this way. One day, when that besotted tyrant had mounted his pulpit, he began to mock and revile the great Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i, shamelessly, grossly screaming obscenities. He cried out, "That Sheikh is the one who has kindled this fire of evil and subjected the whole world to this ordeal." There was an inquirer in the audience, a native of Shiraz. He found the taunts, jeers, and indecencies to be more than he could bear. Under cover of darkness, he betook himself to the mosque, plunged his spearhead between the lips of Mullá Taqí and fled. The next morning they arrested the defenseless believers and thereupon subjected them to agonizing torture, though all were innocent and knew nothing of what had come to pass. There was never any question of investigating the case. The believers repeatedly declared their innocence, but no one paid them any heed. When a few days had passed, the killer gave himself up. He confessed to the authorities, informing them that he had committed the murder because Mullá Taqí had vilified Sheikh Ahmad. I deliver myself into your hands, he told them, so that you will set these innocent people free. They arrested him as well, put him in the stocks, chained him, and sent him in chains, along with the others, to Tehran. Once there, he observed that despite his confession, the others were not released. By night, he made his escape from the prison and went to the house of Reza Khan, that rare and precious man, that star sacrifice among the lovers of God, the son of Muhammad Khan, master of the horse to Muhammad Shah. He stayed there for a time, after which he and Reza Khan secretly rode away to the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi in Mazandaran. Muhammad Khan sent riders after them to track them down, but try as they might, no one could find them. Those two horsemen got to the fort of Tabarsi, where both of them won a martyr's death. As for the other friends who were in the prison at Tehran, some of these were returned to Qazvín, and they too suffered martyrdom. One day, the administrator of finance, Mirza Shafi, called in the murderer and addressed him, saying, "Jináb, do you belong to a dervish order, or do you follow the law? If you are a follower of the law, why did you deal that learned mujtahid a cruel, a fatal blow in the mouth? If you are a dervish and follow the path, one of the rules of the path is to harm no man. How then could you slaughter that zealous divine?" "Sir," he replied, "besides the law and besides the path, we also have the truth. It was in serving the truth that I paid him for his deed." These things would take place before the reality of this cause was revealed, and all was made plain. For in those days, no one knew that the manifestation of the Bab would culminate in the manifestation of the Blessed Beauty, and that the law of retaliation would be done away with. And the foundation principle of the law of God would be this, that it is better for you to be killed than to kill, that discord and contention would cease, and the rule of war and butchery would fall away. In those days, that sort of thing would happen. But praise be God, with the advent of the Blessed Beauty, such a splendor of harmony and peace shone forth, such a spirit of meekness and long-suffering, that when in Yazd men, women, and children were made the targets of enemy fire, or were put to the sword, when the leaders and the evil ulamas and their followers joined together and unitedly assaulted those defenseless victims and spilled out their blood, hacking at and rending apart the bodies of chaste women, with their daggers slashing the throats of children they had orphaned, then setting the torn and mangled limbs on fire, not one of the friends of God lifted a hand against them. Indeed, among those martyrs, those real companions of the ones who died, long gone at Karbala, was a man who, when he saw the drawn sword, flashing over him, thrust sugar candy into his murderer's mouth and cried, "With a sweet taste on your lips, put me to death, for you bring me martyrdom, my dearest wish." Let us return to our theme. After the murder of her impious uncle, Mullá Taqí in Qazvín, Tahirih fell into dire straits. She was a prisoner and heavy of heart, grieving over the painful events that had come to pass. She was watched on every side by attendants, guards, the farishers, and her foes. While she languished thus, Baha'u'llah dispatched Ḥájí Qazvíní, husband of the celebrated Khatun Jan, from the capital, and they managed by stratagem to free her from that embroilment and got her to Tehran in the night. She alighted at the mansion of Baha'u'llah and was lodged in an upper apartment. When word of this spread throughout Tehran, the government hunted for her high and low. Nevertheless, the friends kept arriving to see her in a steady stream, and Tahirih, seated behind the curtain, would converse with them. One day, the great Sayyid Yahya, surnamed Wahid, was present there. As he sat without, Tahirih listened to him from behind the veil. I was then a child and was sitting on her lap. With eloquence and fervor, Wahid was discoursing on the signs and verses that bore witness to the advent of the new manifestation. She suddenly interrupted him and, raising her voice, vehemently declared, "O Yahya, let deeds, not words, testify to thy faith. If thou art a man of true learning, cease idly repeating the traditions of the past. For the day of service, of steadfast action is come. Now is the time to show forth the true signs of God, to rend asunder the veils of idle fancy, to promote the word of God, and to sacrifice ourselves in His path. Let deeds, not words, be our adorning." The Blessed Beauty made elaborate arrangements for Tahirih's journey to Badasht and sent her off with an equipage and retinue. His own party left for that region some days afterwards. In Badasht there was a great open field. Through its center a stream flowed, and to its right, left, and rear there were 3 gardens, the envy of paradise. One of those gardens was assigned to Quddus, but this was kept a secret. Another was set apart for Tahirih, and in a third was raised the pavilion of Baha'u'llah. On the field amidst the 3 gardens, the believers pitched their tents. Evenings, Baha'u'llah, Quddus, and Tahirih would come together. In those days, the fact that the Bab was the Qa'im had not yet been proclaimed. It was the Blessed Beauty with Quddus who arranged for the proclamation of a universal advent and the abrogation and repudiation of the ancient laws. Then one day, and there was a wisdom in it, Baha'u'llah fell ill. That is, the indisposition was to serve a vital purpose. On a sudden, in the sight of all, Quddus came out of his garden and entered the pavilion of Baha'u'llah. But Tahirih sent him a message to say that their host being ill, Quddus should visit her garden instead. His answer was, "This garden is preferable. Come then to this one." Tahirih, with her face unveiled, stepped from her garden, advancing to the pavilion of Baha'u'llah. And as she came, she shouted aloud these words: "The trumpet is sounding, the great trump is blown, the universal advent is now proclaimed." The believers gathered in that tent were panic struck, and each one asked himself, how can the law be abrogated? How is it that this woman stands here without her veil? "Read the Surah of the Inevitable," said Baha'u'llah, and the reader began. "When the day that must come shall have come suddenly, day that shall abase, day that shall exalt." And thus was the new dispensation announced, and the great resurrection made manifest. At the start, those who were present fled away, and some forsook their faith, while some fell a prey to suspicion and doubt, and a number, after wavering, returned to the presence of Baha'u'llah. The conference of Badasht broke up, but the universal advent had been proclaimed. Afterward, Qudus hastened away to the fort of Tabarti, and the Blessed Beauty with provisions and equipment journeyed to Niala, having the intention of going on from there by night, making his way through the enemy encampment and entering the fort. But Mullá Taqí, the governor of Amul, got word of this, and with 700 riflemen arrived in Niala. Surrounding the village by night, he sent Baha'u'llah with 11 riders back to Amul, and those calamities and tribulations told of before came to pass. As for Tahirih, after the breakup at Badasht, she was captured, and the oppressors sent her back on the guard to Tehran. There she was imprisoned in the house of Mahmud Khan the Kalantar. But she was aflame, enamored, restless, and could not be still. The ladies of Tehran, on one pretext or another, crowded to see and listen to her. It happened that there was a celebration at the mayor's house for the marriage of his son. A nuptial banquet was prepared, and the house adorned. The flower of Tehran's ladies were invited, the princesses, the wives of viziers, and other great. A splendid wedding it was, with instrumental music and vocal melodies. By day and night, the lute, the bells, and songs. Then Tahirih began to speak, and so bewitched were the great ladies that they forsook the stern and the drum and all the pleasures of the wedding feast, to crowd about Tahirih and listen to the sweet words of her mouth. Thus she remained a helpless captive. Then came the attempt on the life of the Shah. A farman was issued, she was sentenced to death. Saying she was summoned to the prime ministers, they arrived to lead her away from the Kalantar's house. She bathed her face and hands, arrayed herself in a costly dress, and scented with the attar of roses, she came out of the house. They brought her into a garden, where the headsmen waited, but these wavered and then refused to end her life. A slave was found, far gone in drunkenness, besotted, vicious, black of heart, and he strangled Tahirih. He forced a scarf between her lips and rammed it down her throat. Then they lifted up her unsolid body and flung it in a well, there in the garden, and over it threw down earth and stones. But Tahirih rejoiced. She had heard with a light heart the tidings of her martyrdom. She set her eyes on the supernal kingdom and offered up her life. Salutations be unto her and praise. Holy be her dust, as the tears of light come down on it from heaven.